Okay, well, welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon, Besieged to Bolstered, ? The Biden environmental transition. We've counted up and we're now 84 days into the first 100 days of a whole new presidential administration. It's set about turning all these campaign promises on the environment into action. Of course, most of you are familiar with what they've been responding to. Biden won in part by pledging to reverse course from the Trump administration and really bolster the federal environmental policies and regulatory agencies. And we're here today to discuss what they've actually been doing, their plans and accomplishments thus far, also how this transition stacks up against its predecessors, its own promises, and the challenges ahead. So we've gotten together a fine group of panelists here, leaders and specialists in several environmental and related fields, each of them following the Biden transition from a different angle, from the standpoints of environmental history, law and policy, of environmental justice, and scientific integrity. Out of all of it, we're aiming to paint a multifaceted portrait of where the Biden transition now stands and where it's headed. Now, there's several people I want to thank at the outset here. First of all, EDGI, within EDGI, especially Jessica Varner, Leif Fredrickson, and the many others who helped prepare the work that we're presenting in the webinar. A special thanks to Shannon Lemke, who has worked so hard over the last month and been so vital to pulling off the event. I also wanted to extend a warm thanks to our collaborators. That's the three other organizations represented here and their press people. Thanks to the public employees for environmental responsibility, to We Act for Environmental Justice, and to the Union of Concerned Scientists for your support for this endeavor. Now, to get us started with some logistics, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon Lemke, our communications coordinator at EDGI. She's been such a vital part of EDGI's media relations and communications, our strategies, and so on. Today, she's going to go over some basics about how the webinar is going to work.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this panel discussion. I'm really looking forward to it and hearing all of our great panelists speak. My name's Shannon Lemke. As Chris says, I handle the communications for the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, or EDGI for much shorter. Before we get started, I just want to go over some logistics with Zoom, which we're all probably really familiar with at this point. But first, you'll see that we are recording this discussion this afternoon, so that's just a heads up on that. Also note that the chat is open and turned on for this event, and I'm going to go ahead and put EDGI's code of conduct into the chat right now. Right here. And this is just what we use internally and externally for events to outline basic expectations around respect and non-harassment. So I just wanted to flag that and also flag that if you have any concerns at any point during the event, you can direct message me under the EDGI host username, or you can also email me. I have my email there in the chat, or Kelsey Breseman, who's another EDGI person, and you can email us at any point during or after the event. So feel free to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and where you're calling in from. It would be great to see where folks are calling in from. So feel free to do that. And the last thing I'll mention is just that throughout the webinar, the Q&A feature will be open, and you can find this by clicking Q&A at the bottom of your screen and opening up that box. And then at any point you can type in a question that you may have for the whole panel or for just a particular panelist, either way. And we'll either try to get to that question perhaps during the presentations or at the very end during the dedicated Q&A portion. And also if you see a question in there that you also had, go ahead and hit the thumbs up, and that'll just upvote that question and give us a sense of which questions we should really prioritize and make sure that we do get to. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and hand it back to Chris Sellers, who's going to be facilitating the discussion and introducing all of our speakers. And Chris is a professor of history at Stony Brook University and has served on the coordinating committee for EDGI, as well as served as the lead for EDGI's policy monitoring and interviewing initiative. So he's been really, really integral to EDGI for years now. So thanks so much, Chris. On to you.
Okay, well, I'm going to introduce just in order of when speakers are going in the lineup. And I wanted to start with our EDGI folks, both of them, as well as I, are environmental historians. Jessica Varner, she's a lecturer in architectural history at MIT and a visiting assistant professor at Platt, and is also an incoming fellow at USC Society of Fellows. She's an EDGI steering committee member and coordinator of what you'll hear about today, our new People's EPA website. As is Leif Fredrickson, who can't be with us today. He has a family emergency. He is a visiting assistant professor in the history department at the University of Montana. And he's our interviewing curator at EDGI, our oral history interviews. The next speaker, then I will go, and the next speaker is Tim Whitehouse. He is executive director of the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or PEER. That organization supports current and former public employees who seek a higher standard of environmental ethics and scientific integrity within their agencies. So working with a lot of whistleblowers. Previously, he served as a senior attorney at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and was also head of the Law and Policy Program at the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation in Montreal. Our next speaker is Peggy Shepard. She's co-founder and executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice, an organization known to many of you with a long history of engaging people in Northern Manhattan, community-based planning to address environmental protection and advance environmental policy. She has, among her many positions and accolades, she served on the executive committee of the National Black Environmental Justice Network. She was the first female chair of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council to the US EPA. And among her awards, the Jane Jacobs Medal from the Rockefeller Foundation for Lifetime Achievement, and at least 2 honorary doctorates from Smith College and Lawrence University. Our final speaker is Jacob Carter. He is a leading research scientist for the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. He investigates how science is used in the policymaking process, with a special focus on issues of scientific integrity across the federal government. He has many academic qualifications, among them a PhD in ecology and in evolutionary biology, as well as a qualification and certificate in environmental studies from the University of Kansas. So that's our lineup. We're really excited to hear from everybody. And I think we'll start with Jessica, who will tell us a little bit about some things EDGI has been doing on this front.
A second for setup. All right. What a pleasure to speak at this political pivot point as environmental justice, climate change, and scientific integrity become keywords in the Biden administration. I'll share what collaborators at the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, what we fondly refer to as EDGI, are doing and have been doing to keep the government accountable, a group I'm super lucky to collaborate with. First, a quick overview of EDGI. The group coalesced in November 2016 to document, analyze changes to environmental governance under the Trump administration. Our over 50-member network from multiple academic institutions, nonprofit and grassroots organizations, and professions document, analyze, and advocate for federal provision of environmental data and governance, working to improve environmental information stewardship, promote environmental democracy, health, and justice in this digital age. This amazing network of historians, scientists, data analysts, activists, advocates, and more are organized in working groups under themes such as environmental data justice, alternative org, website monitoring, policy interviewing. And while Trump's administration was our catalyst, our watchdog ways run deep as we continue to monitor, advocate, and act as Biden's administration shifts words, resources, and agency methods. For example, EDGI's web monitoring group has been tracking website changes, scrutinizing tens of thousands of federal agency environmental web pages, since 2016. They report there has been moderate progress in the Biden administration. For example, several agencies now use the term climate crisis. There have been updates to EJ agreements and EJ small grants, and there are instances where the Trump administration documents have been revoked due to political interference and agency scientific integrity policy violations, such as this screenshot, thanks to Gretchen. Chris, Leif, and I are part of the policy interviewing working group at EDGI, which analyzes changes to federal institutions and environmental, energy, and climate policies in various projects. In-depth reports, white papers, public comments, op-eds, fact sheets, letters to Congress, FOIA requests, websites, and public histories of environmental governance are our work. And in December 2020, EDGI launched a People's EPA, APE, a collaborative digital project to tell the complex public history of the EPA and help illuminate a path forward. And since December, APE has slowly released previously anonymous interview transcripts of EDGI interviewers and collaborators conducted over 125 sessions over the past 4 years and still counting, with over 90 EPA and environmentally related employees and retirees. A majority are career employees. They worked in various headquarter offices, divisions, and programs from enforcement and compliance, air and environmental justice, and beyond. The interviews reveal the Trump administration's impact, as well as other administration transitions. As Chris Seller notes, the interviews aren't just an indictment of Trump administration's attack on science, they also make up a library of lessons learned. And he will go into a little bit more in depth next. The APA website also is tracking the headlines daily related to the EPA's reconstruction and rebuilding found in local and national media. We provide historical agency timelines, track other groups who are tracking the Biden transition, provide archival documents and resources, such as EPA FOIA requests in collaboration with other groups, such as Toxic Docs, and feature data analytics, such as on the EPA's budget or enforcement dollars over its history. And the APE, as shown here, continues to grow as we watch, analyze, and document together, making EPA's complex work clear. And I'll pass it over to Chris for more.
So I'm going to draw on a lot of what Jessica was talking about to pull together an historical perspective on what we've seen of the Biden administration thus far. And I'm kind of standing in here for Leif as speaker, but the other contributors include him and Jessica and others in EDGI. There we go. So after years, what time am I talking about? A moment of transition. After years in which the EPA came under siege from its own political leadership, a new chief arrived promising to turn the agency around. He minced no words about his predecessor, how this fellow had crippled the agency and abused the process of administering America's environmental laws, squandering the trust of the American people. Stepping in to restore confidence in the EPA, he confronted an agency in trouble, hobbled by shrinking budgets, fleeing staff, and low morale. So who am I talking about? Well, those of you who know your EPA history have probably already realized I'm talking not about Michael Regan, our recently arrived administrator, but about instead William Ruckelshaus. He was the agency's inaugural administrator once it was first established in 1970, and he returned to head up the agency in 1983 after Ronald Reagan's first appointee, Ann Gorsuch, was pushed out. Now that we're getting deeper into the Biden administration in its transition of this and other agencies, the EPA's own history can, I think, provide an illuminating window on just how this transition stacks up against its predecessors, and a little bit more. The history of similar, if not identical, past transitions provides us with a kind of mirror, offering comparisons that help situate what we've seen of the Biden transition thus far, while suggesting opportunities as well as perils that are ahead for Reagan and the rest of the new Biden leadership. If the 1983 transition led by Ruckelshaus offers one such lens through which to interpret what we're seeing, the 2009 to 10 transition from George W. Bush to Barack Obama offers another. Setting these two prior reverse course transitions alongside the current one also illuminates two long building trends I'll emphasize today that have made the Biden transition historically unique. And these are the ongoing polarization of environmental politics by party and the growing prominence of climate and environmental justice. Starting with the Ruckelshaus return of 1983-84, despite those similarities we saw at the outset, the political conditions under which it unfolded were quite different from what we're seeing today. Foremost among these, it happened under Republican President Ronald Reagan, whose own reversal of support for Ruckelshaus's predecessor pointed to how many Republicans at this stage still supported the EPA and the nation's relatively new environmental laws. Despite Reagan's reversal, however, his Whitehouse still placed significant limits on what Ruckelshaus could do, exemplified by newer policy fronts and issues such as acid rain. And interestingly, Ruckelshaus also struggled with the hesitancy in his own enforcement staff. Traumatized by the breakup of the EPA's enforcement office under Gorsuch and all the disincentives she put in their way, their initiatives remained at historic lows 6 months in, at which point Ruckelshaus gave his famous gorilla in the closet speech to try and buck them up, to arouse a more confident and aggressive attitude against environmental violations. And we may anticipate and see that Reagan is going to face similar issues down the line. Nevertheless, over Ruckelshaus's 18 months at EPA's helm, its budget and staff at least began to be restored, even as those issues we now see as prominent, climate change and environmental justice, were just beginning to percolate. The transition of 2009 to 10, during which a newly elected Obama brought in Lisa Jackson as EPA head, it more closely resembles today's in some other ways. The Democrats were taking over executive leadership from Republicans, change of parties, and for a brief period, they also controlled both houses of Congress. They replaced a Republican administration more explicitly hostile, especially on climate action, as well as against the science behind it. With climate change on its way to its current high profile, the Obama White House itself appointed some climate leadership within. That was the arrival of Carol Browner as the climate czar, the first predecessor to Biden's current White House level climate appointees, Gina McCarthy and John Kerry. Jackson's EPA also set about drafting the endangerment finding, which justified the policies it then began to explore on how to regulate greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. Yeah, in history that might repeat itself, Browner had trouble exerting much influence in White House circles, and Obama-led climate and other initiatives then came up against the Republican takeover of Congress in 2010. Among the other precedents that the Obama years have bequeathed the Biden team are its growing emphasis on environmental justice, and perhaps counterintuitively, a continuation from the Bush administration of reductions in EPA's budgets and staff. This is from a 1999 historic high. This last, the continuation of declines, was largely because of a hostile Republican Congress, once again. Biden's proposed budget increase of 21% just out last week would go a long way toward restoring what the EPA has lost. But for that to happen, it needs to be sustained over a number of years, not just a one-year deal. In the light of this history, we can come to a few conclusions about what exactly is historically new in the Biden transition so far. For one thing, it confronts historically unprecedented damage at the EPA and especially in other environmental agencies. That has come not just from the 4 years of Trump, but from a longer-term corrosion of its capacity. And where the Trump administration especially distinguished itself on the damage front was in a multifaceted attack on federal science and its role in environmental policy, which Tim Whitehouse and Jacob Carter are going to discuss further. Also, what stands out historically is how much the Biden team seeks to concentrate at the White House level, its efforts both against climate change and on behalf of environmental justice. And we'll hear more, especially about its activities on environmental justice from Peggy Shepard. But this White House concentration of both efforts seems to reflect a resolve to try and overcome the siloing to which federal agencies are prone to attempt not just a cross, but maybe a pan-agency approach to these problems. The other historically new facet of what we've seen in the Biden administration is his willingness to spend in order to accomplish its goals. There's some precedents here in the Obama stimulus of 2009, which funded more Superfund cleanups and alternative energy initiatives. But the level of spending, 1.9 trillion in the COVID rescue package, 2 trillion in the infrastructure plan, and then this 2022 budget, they are considerably more ambitious. And a much greater share of the infrastructure proposal also goes toward transitioning away from fossil fuels. But finally, I think there is one looming question, one additional one for us to watch as this transition unfolds. Will it wind up restoring the EPA and other agencies to what they once were, or will it be able to effectively recreate environmental governance? For us at EDGI, that would mean not just overcoming the silos and bolstering the science, but making it more just and also more accessible to those communities it protects. Thank you. And now we'll move along to hear from Timothy Whitehouse.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Hold on while I get set up here. Well, thank you, Chris. And for those of you participating, over the years, we've relied very much on EDGI's data and information. So it's a pleasure to be here and share our perspectives on the new administration. As Chris said in the introduction, we deal quite oftentimes with whistleblowers. We represent actual whistleblowers pro bono. What I wanted to do today in this presentation is provide a perspective on whether we are entering a new era, share with you some of our client experiences during this transition, talk a little bit about the Scientific Integrity Act. Jacob will drill down deeper into this, and then offer some perspectives on long-term trends, particularly as they relate to whistleblowers and scientific integrity. So are we entering a new era? Let's hope so. I don't think I need to go back and put up some of the problems in the Trump administration. Those were quite evident as it waged a war both on the environment, the federal government, and the scientists within the government. So we see some very positive announcements and actions out of the Biden administration. Perhaps one of the most revolutionary, if he's able to hold to this pledge, is to protect scientists from political interference and make sure, I think what is key here is that they are able to provide valuable information and insights to the American people. The language and actions out of the EPA Administrator Reagan are very promising. Just this week, he issued a memo where he committed EPA to operating in a fishbowl, borrowing some language from William Ruckelshaus, and to being open and accessible to all points of view. And very importantly, after the Trump administration, and from our perspective, is reaffirming employees' rights to petition or furnish information to Congress and to engage in protected whistleblower activities. All right. I'm not sure why I'm not going to the next screen, but okay, there we go. I wanted to talk about some of our client experiences. Before I do that, I did want to caveat this, that we are in a period of transition where language and rhetoric really matters. And the hard part's going to come real soon as the administration tries to assert control over the bureaucracies and further its own vision and goals. And in some of those agencies and some of those programs, it's going to be easier than others. So for example, the administration has made climate a priority. It's staffing up its climate offices throughout the federal agencies with some of the best and brightest thinkers. It's reaching out to climate scientists who did not fare well under the Trump administration. But in other agencies, which will be important for an environmental agenda and in parts of EPA, it's going to be very difficult. So let's just look for a moment at USDA. Tom Vilsack has come back from the Obama administration to lead the USDA. That's an agency with tremendous scientific integrity problems. It's going to be playing a major role in climate change issues, as well as pesticide and chemical issues. In 2016, an OIG survey of nearly 1,000 scientists, of those 120 said their work had been suppressed or altered for reasons other than technical merit. And that's a pretty astounding number. If we look at US EPA, there are significant problems in certain parts of EPA that were made worse under the Trump administration, but have been longstanding problems. We have a 2020 employee survey results. Those will come out officially very soon, but some of them have been published. 43% responded negatively to the following statement: I can disclose a suspected violation of law, rule, or regulation without fear of reprisal. So of the employees that are working in chemicals and pesticide programs, almost 1/2 said they cannot disclose violations of law, rules, or regulations without fear of reprisal. Again, that's fairly astounding. So the administration has a tough road ahead in terms of reforming these agencies, and it will have to go beyond political leadership. They'll have to go down into the management, career management staff. So it's rhetoric's fairly easy. Cases are harder. I wanted to share with you 3 cases that are up on the screen, just very briefly. These are public cases, so you can Google the names if you want to learn more about these cases. But we do see some promising signs, but again, the jury's still out on this. I wanted to talk about Evie Emenegger of the USGS. She is a microbiologist who managed the highest biosafety level containment laboratory at USGS's Seattle-based Western Fisheries Conservation Center. She had 28 years of excellent job performance ratings. She had filed a scientific integrity complaint concerning the failure of the lab over a 6-month period to address the release of certain pathogen contaminated wastewaters into wetlands. She had been subject to, since then, poor performance reviews, and was ultimately, after a very long period on administrative leave, was terminated in March 2021, which you will note is during the Biden administration. However, just this week, Monday, an abrupt turnaround, the USGS rescinded her removal and said it would reinstate her to her previous position and is working to determine the appropriate amount of back pay. So that, hopefully, we don't know why that happened, but assume that someone higher up looked at this case and said, why on earth would we defend the actions of the previous administration in a case like this, where someone was trying to do the right thing and had years of good service to the government. 2 other cases that are also very, I think, have been in the press and have been talked about that are unresolved, but I think are worth mentioning here. The first is Dr. Ruth Etzel, who is an internationally recognized expert on child health and the environment. She literally wrote the book, Children's Health and the Environment. She was hired by the Obama administration after a nationwide search, and she was director of the Office of Children's Health Protection under Trump, just as the federal strategy was nearing completion for the elimination of lead from children. And she had been sidelined after speaking out about some regulatory issues and her concerns about the direction of the Trump administration. Her removal came during a backdrop of some of the most blatant problems at EPA by the Trump administration, their disregard for science, their attack on scientists, including her. She was removed from her position and has not been doing meaningful work at EPA since. And this is an EPA that is largely very few epidemiologists, which is what Ruth does. So that case is outstanding. We have another case, Walter Lowen, who's an environmental analyst at the Bureau of Land Management. I bring this case up. It does relate to oil and gas and climate change. He had had a number of years of outstanding service with the Bureau of Land Management. He is a retired member of the US military. He repeatedly stressed to BLM management the high potential mortality from the Converse County Oil and Gas Project in Wyoming for hawks and other birds. And he was sidelined after repeatedly making those concerns known and given make work tasks. And he is being proposed from removal from the federal service despite his many years of strong performance work there. And so those are 2 cases that kind of shine a light on how the administration will handle some of these issues where scientists or employees have spoken up and have been punished for doing so under the old administration. There's a real tendency in transitions to want to look forward and not backwards. And given what we've gone through in the last 4 years, it's very important that this administration really focus on making these employees whole again and bringing them back into meaningful work in the federal service, and to stop some of the retaliatory efforts that had happened under the Trump administration. I did want to talk about scientific integrity policies. Those were started with the best intentions. Many of our clients and others that have problems in the federal government and become whistleblowers or make protected disclosures generally can do it through scientific integrity policies, or even if they don't know those policies exist, at the root of their concerns are problems about scientific integrity. Just last week, I did receive an email I wanted to share from a former EPA scientist who said scientific integrity policies are great window dressing for use at congressional hearings dealing with media and the public, not so much for ensuring that scientific integrity is actually practiced inside the agency when science and politics in a larger sense collide. So we welcome this look at scientific integrity by the Biden administration. And I think Jacob will delve into this much more deeply, but there are a few key things that I wanted to highlight as it ties directly into whistleblowing and science and government. I put some of the bullets down here that are important to us. There are a few others, but I wanted to highlight some of the big failings. One is managers are really never penalized for retaliating against whistleblowers. And that includes not only career civil service managers, but supervisors and political appointees. And there needs to be stronger laws to ensure that that can happen, particularly with political appointees where you may need a new law being passed. I also think that what we see oftentimes is supervisors, and this again happens under both Democratic and Republican administrations, are often involved directly or indirectly in evaluating the scientific integrity complaints of subordinates, and that really needs to end. And finally, scientists need to be able to publish and lecture in their fields without prior approval, with very limited exceptions, and that is not happening. We've gone from science-based agencies to agencies that have been largely run by communication offices, not by the scientists. And that's been a trend that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years and has really accelerated under the Trump administration. I won't talk specifically here, but I will if people want to contact us. There are a number of efforts to improve whistleblower protection laws. We do need better laws to make sure that what happened under the Trump administration doesn't happen again. We could have a change in Congress in 2 years. We could have a change in the president in 4 years. And I think one thing the last 4 years has taught us is that our legal protections for scientists and federal employees are not strong enough, and that a strong executive can come in and crush the federal government, the federal agencies that they're in charge of overseeing. I put some quotes up here because I think they're meaningful for whistleblowing in general. And they'll be meaningful in the Biden administration and the administrations after him. And I think sometimes what we see is, well, we know whistleblowers are rarely ever rewarded for what they do. There have been a few exceptions now, particularly in the Trump era, where the work of whistleblowers has been recognized by the new administration, and they need to continue to do that. We also see employees get caught up in these bureaucratic sort of nightmare scenarios where when they make scientific integrity complaints or complaints about what's happening within their divisions, they get caught up in these sort of petty personnel issues and retaliation by their management against them. They may have all their time cards reviewed for years, things like that. And meanwhile, these people who are trying to do the right thing are having a very difficult time, and the polluters are out there having a free reign of things. And so that's why I put the second quote in. Laws are like cobwebs, which may catch small flies, but let the wasp and hornets break through. We need to make sure that does not happen to our civil servants and in our environmental laws. And unfortunately, it is happening. And the third bullet is from Nancy Kassenbaum. For those of you that know that name, I believe she was a Republican at a time when oversight was a Republican and Democratic function. It's tedious. It needs to happen. It will make both, if done correctly, both parties stronger and our government stronger. This is my contact information. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat or Q&A. I put some thoughts down below that the destruction of science under Trump gives President Biden both a low bar for improvement and a tall task for drawing the brightest line ever known between science and economic and political influence. And I know all the groups on this webinar are going to be working full steam to make sure that happens and keep the pressure on to make sure we can protect our scientists and our policy in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for that illuminating talk. Sounds like we'll hear from Jacob in just a minute, but next up is Peggy Shepard, who I believe I forgot to mention is also on the Whitehouse Environmental Justice Advisory Commission, and so has some very interesting things to tell us about what's been going on, I imagine. I understand. Peggy, take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I've actually been made the co-chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and we have a lot of work to do in a very short period of time, but I'll get to that. I just want to start out by saying that environmental justice has really had a renaissance in large part, unfortunately, during because of the current COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw African Americans die at higher rates from COVID due to the high levels of air toxins in their communities. And so it really reminds us how profoundly the energy and environmental policy decisions of the past have really failed communities of color, allowing persistent stressors and pandemics to disproportionately impact communities of color and low income. So prior to the presidential election, many environmental justice and national green groups, advocates came together to really have a strong vision and platform about tackling the climate crisis, while also advancing our shared goals of climate, racial, economic justice to improve public health, our climate future, and community well-being. And to achieve that vision, we made a number of recommendations to Biden. We said, you need to enact solutions that address the legacy of pollution. You can do a lot of new initiatives, but if you aren't dealing with what's there now, it will not appear to be effective. We said that policies must center justice and equity, that we had to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, and that there needed to be a just transition to a pollution-free energy economy, and that we needed to reduce transportation pollution as well. And so what we've really understood is that Biden has really adopted that vision, and he's working toward implementation after months of consultation with communities and a diversity of advocates. And so really addressing environment and climate justice has been a core part of his climate plan. And he's appointed an array of officials who are meeting with advocates, believe me, daily and weekly, and soliciting recommendations and advice on specific issues. I've probably had meetings with heads of federal agencies 2 and 3 times a week. That is how they are being made available to the advocacy community to really talk about their new initiatives and to seek advice on key issues. So what I am seeing in real time is that Biden is actually using an all-inclusive, all-of-government approach. So he's established an environmental and climate justice division within DOJ. which he did say he would do. And they're looking to pursue cases to the fullest extent of the law. That has not been done in years. He's working to elevate environmental justice in the federal government and in the all of government approach. So currently the federal government has two key environmental justice groups, and Biden is elevating those and reestablishing them. So the first one is the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and also the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council. Both report directly to the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ. And of course, the chair reports directly to the president. And to support the work, CEQ has hired senior and dedicated environmental justice staff. So those two councils will be charged with revising Executive Order 12898, which was initially promulgated by Clinton and then reauthorized by Obama. And that executive order will be revised in collaboration with environmental justice leaders and the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. In fact, we had our first meeting about a week and a half ago, and we are divided into three committees. There are about 29 people on the committee, on the council, which is a federal FACA. And the committees are Justice 40, which I'm chairing, the executive order, and the mapping tool. And so the advocates are going to be developing recommendations in those three categories so that they can be submitted to the administration by mid-May. So we clearly have a lot of work to tackle. I'd also say that we're really looking at clear performance metrics to ensure accountability as we implement the executive order. Because the previous executive orders have said, oh, well, the agency, 17 agencies have to develop an environmental justice plan. That wasn't really done in a robust way. The agencies kind of gathered a bunch of stuff that they said was EJ, and they put it forth as their plan. But there had never been any kind of reassessment or critique of what they were doing or where the gaps were so that a plan would really be effective. So we expect that to change. And also, once the executive order has been revised, the White House EJ Advisory Council and the Interagency Council will publish an annual public performance scorecard on the implementation. And so again, the White House EJ Council will be making recommendations on what that scorecard should look like and what it should, what are the measures it should be focused on. Biden administration is also working to overhaul the EPA's Civil Rights Compliance Office. We know that for sometimes over 10 years, civil rights complaints had simply sat at EPA, not even, as far as I can tell, not even read. And so he has now appointed some very progressive attorneys to begin to work in that civil rights office and ensure that that we will have some justice for communities who are overburdened and filing those Title VI administrative complaints. He's also working to create a data-driven climate and economic justice screening tool. And again, that's one of the key areas that the EJ Council will be working on. And the idea there is to identify communities threatened by cumulative impacts of stresses of climate change, economic, racial inequality, environmental pollution, and to ensure that the information is accessible. It'll be published in multiple languages and really there to identify disadvantaged communities, including overburdened tribal areas. There'll also be a new mandate to set up new air monitoring in frontline and fence line communities. And the administration is going to be reaching out to the states to ensure that they are adequately monitoring environmental pollution, emissions, criteria pollutants, and toxics in frontline communities. They'll also be installing new monitors. They will be ensuring that the states install new monitors where there are none, so that they can really provide accurate and available real-time data. There's also discussions about creating a new civilian climate corps that would be working in frontline communities, that would help create a pipeline and also create job training to link them with jobs. And I know there's a proposal about to be introduced by AOC and Senator Markey around a civilian climate corps as well. I would say it's been very important for the administration to establish an interagency team to address particular issues that have been identified and to partner directly with communities. We believe that's the way to directly work to resolve really challenging, persistent pockets of climate inequity. And again, if those interagency teams, because environmental justice is intersectoral, we really have to have those agencies all working on those issues, which is why the executive order targets 17 federal agencies, because we know that housing is a key issue, certainly environment, energy, transportation. So really thinking about the concerns and challenges that arise in communities really impact a variety of agencies, and those policies from those agencies are impacting communities historically in a very negative way. We certainly understand that the administration will be tackling water pollution in a science-based way, prioritizing strategies and technologies to reduce air pollution in traditional traditional EJ communities. And again, recommending that every state prioritize emission reductions in disadvantaged communities that have been identified by the new climate and economic justice screening tool that's going to be developed. And then certainly one thing that's gotten a lot of attention is the idea of targeting investments, energy investments and benefits with the goal of delivering 40% of those benefits to disadvantaged communities. And that's certainly gotten a lot of attention. It's called Justice 40. And the idea is to target energy benefits, 40% of those energy benefits to frontline communities in a number of ways, to focus on clean energy, energy efficiency, clean transit, affordable housing, workforce development, remediation and reduction of legacy pollution, and development of clean water infrastructure. And so I think it's just been amazing, because when I was thinking last night about preparing for this, and I looked back at what the Biden campaign said it would do, and then I looked at the things that I know are happening. And believe me, there are a number of other things I'm sure that I personally just don't know about yet that haven't been publicized. But from what I know, he is actually implementing exactly what he said he would do in his campaign platform on environmental justice and building back better. So I'm feeling very optimistic the devil is always in the details. One of the key issues is that we know that just because you send 40% or you send whatever amount of monies to states, they don't always get to the communities that really need them. I know that in the Gulf Coast, for instance, federal monies that were sent to the Gulf Coast after Katrina never made it to African-American communities that who are still, basically out of pocket, still basically impacted by that, by the storm and the flooding. So how do we really understand the mechanisms to disseminate and distribute resources? And how do we actually hold states accountable that those resources get to the intended intended recipients? So that's really, I think, one of the most important challenges we have to address, and that the administration will have to address. And I am just very happy and optimistic that they are reaching out in such an assertive way to the advocacy community to hear the challenges and to hear what we think are some of the solutions. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy, for really a fascinating insight into what all is going on. And it does sounds good, I guess. So let's get back though. Let's get back to scientific integrity and hear from and across the government and Jacob Carter, who will be speaking about that.
All right. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Edgy, so much for the opportunity to speak today. And it's been just so great to hear all the hope and optimism from all the panelists, and but to also hear about the challenges ahead, because there will be challenges ahead for sure. So I'm going to be talking about what we have seen so far in terms of wins and what we're hoping for in terms of evidence-based decision-making and scientific integrity under the Biden administration. But I thought I would just speak first a little bit about the term scientific integrity and give a little history of where this has come from. So scientific integrity for a long time referred to what was used as a research term to refer to research misconduct. So plagiarism of research, fabrication of data. And if you were ever a graduate student who did some kind of research, you probably had an ethics course where you talked about scientific integrity or ethics in research. And this is where I sort of first came across scientific integrity in my career path. But in the 2000s, this term was used more as a policy term to refer specifically to political interference in evidence-based decision-making that was occurring under the George W. Bush administration. So for example, manipulation of research findings to fit certain political decisions, especially on climate change decisions under that administration. And that is really sort of where I'll focus on today in my talk, is more scientific integrity and its use as used as a policy term. Then under the Obama administration, which ensured to bring science back to decision making, we start to see scientific integrity and this idea of ensuring scientific integrity become the basis and formation of policies and practices that hopefully confer scientific integrity to science-based decision-making across the federal government. So for example, the scientific integrity policies that Tim mentioned earlier. So using this policy definition, I just wanted to say this at the outset. This is a table from a paper that I published with a former colleague, Emily Berman, in the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, where we looked at scientific integrity violations in every administration dating back to President Eisenhower. And we started this project to look and see how the Trump administration compared in terms of its scientific integrity violations and if they were really unprecedented as compared to other administrations. And what we found is that we could find an example of a scientific integrity violation under every administration dating back to Eisenhower. So it didn't matter if it was a Democratic administration or Republican administration, we could find a scientific integrity violation. And UCS has been tracking scientific integrity violations, or what we refer to as attacks on science, since the George W. Bush administration. There were a handful under the Obama administration, and lots under the Trump administration, but we'll continue to watch under the Biden administration as well. I mean, you're always hopeful that you will not see any, but if history is repeating, then I'm sure we will see some. So we'll be watching for that. But the past 4 years were very unprecedented in terms of scientific integrity violations. So this is the attacks on science that we observed since 2017 during the past 4 years. And these are the various categories of attacks that we observed: restrictions on conference attendance, sidelining scientific advisory committees, politicization of grants and funding, rolling back data collection or data accessibility, censorship of scientists, halted, edited, or suppressed studies, and rules, regulations, or orders that should have been informed by science or were mandated to be informed by science, but were indeed not. And so at the end of the 4 years of the Trump administration, we tallied 191 total attacks, which was an unprecedented frequency in terms of what we had calculated previously under both Obama and George W. Bush. So to give you an indication of how unprecedented under the George W. Bush administration, which was the administration that formerly the scientific community viewed as very hostile to science, UCS tallied 98 attacks on science under the George W. Bush administration over 8 years. We tallied 191 under the Trump administration in half that time. So quite unprecedented. And to me, that indicated that maybe there were some weaknesses in the scientific integrity policies and their implementation that weren't quite working. So now we have this new administration, and given the attacks on science that have happened, the weaknesses in scientific integrity that could be there within the federal agencies, the million-dollar question is, what will this administration do? And what will specifically they do to strengthen scientific integrity and protect federal scientists and their work? Which is quite important now. I think we all know that, given the pandemic and the politicization that we saw of the COVID-19 crisis before, and the resulting harm that occurred. So this is a really critical and important question that this administration, an issue that this administration has to tackle. But there has been some progress that has occurred that has been really good at the outset. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the appointment of a science advisor. And for over a decade now, UCS has been recommending in various reports that I'm showing here on the screen that the president should appoint the science advisor to a cabinet level. So there have been various reports in which we have made this recommendation. And this year, we have finally seen that. So Biden did elevate, will elevate his science advisor to a cabinet level position, which is really great because it will give the science advisor some capacity to coordinate more closely with other cabinet members and gives the science advisor a little bit more power to coordinate scientific integrity or other science-based issues across federal agencies. There have been other progress that's been great in terms of memos, executive orders, and anti-science decisions that have been reversed. We just have discussed these in a policy forum that we published in Science back in February. So if you want more details on this, I would encourage you to seek out that publication and read that. So I'll just touch on some highlights here. So there were a number of scientific working groups that have been formed. One through a presidential memorandum that was signed by President Biden on January 27th to strengthen scientific integrity and evidence-based decision-making, established a subcommittee through the National Science and Technology Council, which is still being formed. But the subcommittee will essentially be tasked with reviewing scientific integrity implementation across federal agencies, as well as the existing scientific integrity policies. We've also seen some agencies I'll mention start to do their own review of attacks on science to learn what kind of politicization and political interference occurred in rulemaking and decisions that the agencies were making. So I think that may be a step sort of in that direction of strengthening scientific integrity in federal agencies, which has been really good to see. So this subcommittee will conduct a review and hopefully we'll have some recommendations and some guidance that will help the implementation and strengthen these scientific integrity policies in the long run. This will be directed by the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We also saw a number of working groups formed on COVID-19 during the transition. There was also a health equity task force formed to look more into the disproportionate impacts experienced by underserved communities in terms of infections from COVID-19 and vaccine distribution, and a number of councils, as we heard from Peggy Shepard today, and work that is ongoing on the front of environmental justice. In terms of scientific leadership, there's also been progress there. So the presidential memorandum took a very large step, I thought, to establish scientific integrity officers at all agencies. So not just agencies that primarily conduct scientific work, but all agencies, because all agencies at some level, right, do some sort of evidence-based decision-making. It also established chief science officers in science-based agencies as well. And then the Biden administration has been moving quickly to nominate and appoint qualified leaders to lead science-based agencies, which has been really great to see, especially after the past 4 years. In terms of scientific advisory committees, there has been some progress ongoing here as well. The memorandum that I mentioned earlier also establishes a review for processes that guide the individuals who are nominated and will sit on these advisory committees, as well as some transparency issues in scientific advisory committee processes. We hope that the administration will reconstitute a number of these committees that were filled with unqualified experts. It seems like the EPA is moving forward to do just that. And we are encouraging the administration to diversify its members on these committees. It looks like there will be a review of a number of charters for committees that were disbanded, which is great to see because there were a number of important committees that were disbanded. And it looks like the administration will try to find an answer to who are the qualified experts and how do you define that? Who is the qualified expert that deserves to sit on these advisory committees? There will also be some review of conflicts of interest and how those are handled and made available for those sitting on scientific advisory committees. There were also a number of anti-science executive orders that were reversed by the Biden administration, which was great to see. I just have the common names here, but I'm happy to go into any on particular. And of course, the work isn't over yet. And so we still have a number of recommendations ongoing for strengthening scientific integrity. The implementation of these policies, I think as we saw from, seeing 191 attacks, most of them conducted by senior level political officials, sort of points at the whole of the implementation of these policies. So we've recommended that maybe the scientific integrity officers should begin to work with inspector generals who have a little bit more independence and power. Something else that would really help is the passage of the Scientific Integrity Act, which would codify a number of provisions, making a lot of these scientific integrity violations and the political interference illegal. We also have a number of recommendations related to communication. And we've also done a separate analysis to see that there were a number of scientists that were lost during the past 4 years. And so the Biden administration is currently making efforts to hire in more scientists, but that is a gap currently. And hopefully the administration will continue to help early career scientists into agencies to build up that scientific workforce and diversify it as well. So there's much more, but I will yield my time and thank you all for listening.
Thanks a lot, Jacob, for covering so much ground and so much sort of terrain. It's moving parts. We have a lot of moving parts here. And we do have, I have a whole bunch of questions, but why don't we start with the questions that have been kind of lingering in the chat. So the first question I think came early on. What should we expect or hope for from U.S. participation at the upcoming biodiversity and climate conferences? I guess the COP is in November, I think it is, this year, the big World Climate Conference, where they look at the climate treaties and do any revisions. So we have 3 thumbs up for that. I can take a first stab at it, since I was the guy who talked a bunch about climate, and I have a few thoughts. I think that one of the things that we found out in the last 4 years is that U.S. leadership on climate really does matter. We've seen since Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement and just backed off of greenhouse gas regulation entirely. We also saw Mexico, for instance, do the same. They followed suit, even though this was not a conservative, but a leftist president. Also has abandoned the climate policies of his predecessors and moved full-fledged into more fossil fuel production. And you just think about Obama, how Paris happened was because of some of the things Obama did, especially with China, and his negotiation with China to get China involved in that agreement. So it really does matter. And I think Biden has a great chance to restart that process. I think there's a lot of trust that's been lost, though, in terms of how dependable the US is. And I would just call people's attention to find out more. I mean, I think maybe other panelists have more, but I think this summit that Biden has actually called for next week with 40 of the world's leaders, a summit on climate, is something to watch out for in terms of what exactly the plans may be in terms of the international stage for climate negotiations. Others have things they'd like to say about that one? Okay, why don't we move on to the next 2. Anonymous attendee asked, when identifying, and this may be for Peggy, possibly also for Tim as well, and Jacob, sounds like you might have something to say. When identifying overburdened areas, does that come with an explicit promise to rectify the overburdening? Since identifying areas as damaged, quote unquote, can exacerbate harm if not tied to resourcing and promise of improvement. So the process of identifying, these overburdened communities, is that itself a problem.
You know, I've been hearing that question for decades. It's like people saying, well, let's not redline the redlined communities, because then everybody will know they're redlined. They're redlined. They're already overburdened. Everybody knows who they are, where they are, and the people who live there truly know. So it is absolutely necessary to identify those communities so that we can target solutions. Now, unfortunately, just because we know where those communities are does not mean that there will be enough resources going there to address the issue, or if the issue can be addressed in the way the community would want. I mean, we'd love to shut down, you know, a lot of those chemical and petrochemical plants in Cancer Alley. What we can do is get them, is tighten the air quality regulations to really be health-based, which they say they are, but they no longer are. So I don't think we can commit that we're going to, or that the administration is going to, you know, address all of the legacy pollution there. But we've got to start where we can, where the administration and government does have a way to do that. We need to look at state permitting. I'm sorry, I don't want to, I'm going on and on. This is an issue dear to my heart. But yes, there's so many elements to what we need to do to address legacy pollution, especially when it's permitted. So I would just stop there. And we're trying to push the administration to think in a robust way about that.
Okay. Others have comments on that? If not, we'll move to the next question, which I think is for Peggy also. A little long. Thank you for sharing your important insights in what is happening and for being right there to help affect the change that's needed with this. And this is about the states. With the states so critical for implementation of policies and distribution of resources to affected communities, what are you seeing in the way of communications and partnering actions between the Biden administration and state governments or agencies?
I'd say that we're really, really early on. All of the agencies don't even have all of their senior staffing yet. What has happened is that he has put mechanisms in place to begin considering implementation, but we're not in implementation yet. And I suspect that until some of those recommendations are in and considered, that the outreach to states will not be as robust as it probably will be in the next year or two.
Okay. Not other comments. We have one more general question. I guess this is directed to everyone from Jungmin Lee. Thank you for your wonderful talks. I was rereading a book by Audra Wolfe called Competing with the Soviets. And it makes the point that talks about in the 1960s when racial inequity threatened to undermine US claims to international moral leadership, and ask about what the relevance might be to today's climate and justice crisis. And so what is good for America might be detrimental to Bolivia, Brazil, Sri Lanka, and India. There has been some discussion about the People's Agreement and international climate and environmental justice tribunals. What can we expect to see in the Global Climate Summit next week? And what can EDGI, PEER, UCS, and others do to make the Biden administration develop both domestic and international policies toward climate justice? So balancing the domestic with the international piece of it.
I'll just take a piece of that. And I would say that there's no cookie cutter model. There's the US model. Is there even a US model? There might be a model in Louisiana and a model in New York, but a US model can't be transplanted to another country or nation. And so I hope those tribunals, and I hope that the NGO community will be very strongly going to those meetings and supporting some of those tribunals. They need the support, they need the resources, and I would hope to focus a little more attention there on whether some of these large communities of color, countries of color, are getting the adequate resources they need to be resilient.
Yeah, well,
I'll jump in. This is Tim. I'll speak more domestically in terms of what peer might do. It's important, I think, as we face this climate crisis, to really, those of us that want to protect our natural resources and move to a clean energy economy as quickly as possible, to really make sure the watchdogs are out, making sure that that really happens and that people aren't being taken advantage of along the way. So we set very ambitious climate targets. And within these schemes, we're often finding that there's manipulation of numbers. There are winners that are often very wealthy companies, and there are losers, people left behind. So domestically, we need to make sure that there are not only ambitious goals, but that those goals are equitable in really achieving the results that they're intended to achieve.
I had a couple of thoughts on this. I think it is really interesting that Biden has climate here and EJ here, but when you put EJ together with climate, it does bring up a global north versus global south. And so there's tremendous questions there that have been a matter of debate for ever since the climate negotiations began. I think when when Biden goes into this meeting, we'll see how he brings his climate justice or his justice angle over against the climate commitments. I mean, that's going to be interesting. And I'm not sure another president has really done that in a very robust way. So it may be a little challenge for him. I mean, what I hope he can do is, first of all, emphasize that mitigation of greenhouse emissions is climate justice, and it's justice for the rest of the world. And the other piece of it is that the global negotiations have had such a hard time getting developed nations to actually pony up what the promised contributions that are going to go to energy transitions in the developed world, in the sort of global south. So I hope we can see more commitments on both those fronts coming out. I mean, I hope that we hear them in the summit next week, and going forward, we see some action on those fronts. I mean,
yeah.
And we do have historians in the room. I would like to point out that Colleen Lanier Christensen, who is here, who's working in particular on the OECD. So I think there are people that are asking those global questions. And if they have any points to bring up, we've got experts in the room beyond just our panelists. There's definitely an attendee expert and experts in the room to answer.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we do have a question now on scientific integrity. I had a bunch of those, but let's just get to this one. Is there someone who is specifically looking at scientific integrity regarding new pesticides? This is from Loretta Williams. Is there someone looking at specifically scientific integrity regarding new pesticides in agriculture? Even under the Obama administration, the scientific studies on these new pesticides was largely left to the companies creating those pesticides. So what's going on there with pesticides and pesticide studies? Anybody?
Yeah, I don't, I mean, there's nobody, specifically monitoring the scientific integrity on pesticides specifically. But if there were any political interference ongoing in that, I guess it would depend on the decision, the agency making the decision, right? So if it was TSCA decision, maybe it would be EPA's scientific integrity officer who would oversee that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. We've been doing a lot of work on this recently. There are significant and profound problems in EPA's pesticide program. We've recently filed an inspector general complaint regarding one pesticide and fraud in the decision-making process regarding that pesticide. Neonicotinoids, there have been studies under the Obama administration that were suppressed by USDA in retaliation against scientists for participating in those studies. So it's a huge problem of industry capture of EPA and USDA in the decision-making processes there. And it's going to prove to be a real challenge to the Biden administration to change the way things are done. And you can just see it in the number of pesticides that are being approved in the US that are being banned in other countries throughout the world.
Okay, and we have one more question. I guess this will be our last one. Do you see evidence of greater cross-agency collaborations around environmental justice concerns, for instance, between labor, housing, and the environment? We hear from communities that, and this is from Bonnie Keeler, by the way, we hear from communities that investments in green solutions, remediation of toxic sites, tree planting, parks, et cetera, come with fears of gentrification and displacement. How can we ensure frontline communities share in the benefits of environmental investments? What might be the broader policy tools involved in tandem with these, like relating to housing, job creation, wealth building, community benefits agreements, etc. So a lot of stuff there for 2 minutes, but I guess we can go a little over. Someone want to speak to that? Looks like it might be in Peggy's wheelhouse, at least the cross-agency collaborations that you're seeing. I guess maybe some example or two and how it might shake out.
Well, I think for environmental justice, the cross-agency collaboration is going to be happening through the interagency task force, where every agency will have to have environmental justice plans. They'll have to have a liaison who is working with some of the environmental justice councils. Also with the Justice 40, every agency will be developing a method or a way to disseminate funds based on what those amounts are. And we are suggesting, advocates are suggesting that there be an EJ advisory body in those agencies as well, because they're going to be making some very serious initiatives if they're really going to address the issue. So I think that cross-fertilization is beginning to happen. I know that a variety of agency heads have been reaching out and have been having meetings with advocates, environmental justice advocates. So I think all of the agencies have been given a directive that this is a concern and needs to be a consideration in all of their policies. But it's early.
Yeah, we have to start.
Yeah.
We'll see. Let's stay tuned. On so many fronts, stay tuned. Well, I wanted to thank everyone, all my panelists, especially for your willingness to speak, your great talks, and all that you've shared so effectively, I think. And thank everyone else involved, including the audience, for listening and for some very good questions. This recording of this will be published on YouTube. So look forward to that. We'll be sending that out. I guess, do we send that out to all the registrants, a link or something? Yeah. So you just distribute it widely and let other people take part. Look forward to more of these in the future too, and stay tuned for those.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Great to
Thank
meet
you,
you
everybody.
all. Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap, I guess.
And these